The quality of mercy is not strained. Well, actually, that's something we're going to find out today. So welcome all of you to this mock trial of Shylock, hosted by Berkeley Law. Yes! My name is Eli Simon, and I'm a Chancellor's Professor of Acting at UC Irvine. I'm also the Artistic Director of New Swan Shakespeare Festival, which is located, oh, we got a woo. That was nice. Thank you. Down in Orange County, and we have actors here from New Swan, and really they've come from all over the country here to help with this mock trial. So we would like to take a moment to thank, first of all of you for attending this first mock trial in Berkeley. We've been doing these down in Irvine for a couple of years, but we can see there's tremendous interest, so thank you for coming. We'd also like to thank Alex Shapiro and Charles Cannon for their support. Yay, Alex and Charles. And we'd like to thank Nancy Donovan, the event planner. And thank you, Nancy. We'd also like to thank Freight and Salvage for generously hosting this event. And we encourage community support of this wonderful venue. So, this is one of the most beautiful theaters I've ever seen, so it's delightful to be here. And we are incredibly grateful to everyone for supporting this trial. We're happy you're here, and we're happy to share our love of the bard and law with you. Okay, now we're going to take a quick moment to review the plot of The Merchant of Venice. I mean, I'm going to do this quickly. So, how many of you think you know the play? All right, okay, so this really is a review for most of you. Here's how it goes. Shylock is a moneylender that lives in the Jewish ghetto in Venice. He is vilified by the Venetian Christians who spit on him, call him a dog, and humiliate him on a daily basis. One of these racist Venetians is Antonio, the actual merchant of the play's title. Antonio has promised to lend 3,000 ducats to his friend Bassanio so that Bassanio can woo a beautiful heiress named Portia. However, all of Antonio's ships are at sea and he doesn't have the sum to lend Bassanio. So they ask Shylock, the moneylender, for a loan of 3,000 ducats. Shylock agrees to the loan but makes a condition that it must be repaid in 3 months or the penalty is a pound of Antonio's flesh. They agree to these terms. Meanwhile, Antonio's ships have been wrecked and he is pressed to repay his debt. In court, the day for repayment has passed and Shylock demands his pound of flesh. He is offered more than the amount due, but Shylock, infuriated by the loss of his daughter and years of humiliation, is intent on having justice served. The Duchess refuses to intervene. Portia arrives disguised as a man. And that's about all we should tell you before presenting the trial of The Merchant of Venice. So we're going at this point to bring 4 New Swan actors onto the stage to present the trial from the play that we produced last summer at New Swan. It's an abbreviated version of the trial scene, but all of the important points are hit. So here we have Hope Andrejak, who's playing Portia right here. Hold your applause till we're done. Okay, thanks. And this is Maya Smoot, who plays the Duchess. Here we have our outcast, Greg Unger, who's playing Shylock. And we have Sean Spann here, who's playing the merchant Antonio. Okay, so this is the trial. Oh, great. Actors love to get applause before they act. So they're now going to present the trial scene, as I said, after which we will have our mock trial.
What? Is Antonio here?
Ready. So please, your grace.
I am sorry for thee. Thou art come to answer a stony adversary, an inhuman wretch, incapable of pity, void and empty from any dram of mercy.
I have heard your grace hath ta'en great pains to qualify his rigorous course. But since he stands obdurate, and that no lawful means can carry me out of his envy's reach, I do oppose my patience to his fury, and am armed to suffer with quietness of spirit the very tyranny and rage of his.
Go one and call the Jew into court. Shylock, the world thinks, and I think so too, that thou but lead'st this fashion of thy malice to the last hour of act. And then 'tis thought thou show thy mercy and remorse more strange than is thy strange apparent cruelty. And where thou now exacts the penalty, which is a pound of this poor merchant's flesh, thou wilt not only loose the forfeiture, but touched with human gentleness and love, forgive a moiety of the principal, glancing an eye of pity on his losses that have of late so huddled on his back, and now to press a royal merchant down and pluck commiseration of estate from brassy bosoms and rough hearts of flint, from stubborn Turks and Tartars never trained to offices of tender courtesy. We all expect a gentle answer, Jew.
I have possessed your grace of what I purpose.
And by our holy Sabbath have I sworn to have the due and forfeit of my bond. If you deny me, let the danger light upon your charter and your city's freedom. You'll ask me why I rather choose to have a weight of carrion flesh than to receive 3,000 ducats. I'll not answer that. But say it is my humor. Are you answered? What if my house be troubled by a rat, and I be pleased to give 10,000 ducats to have it banned? Are you answered yet? Some men there are love not a gaping pig, some that are mad when they behold a cat, and others, when the bagpipe sings in the nose, cannot contain their urine. For affection, mistress of passion, sways it to the mood of what it likes or loathes. Now, for your answer, as there is no firm reason to be rendered why he cannot abide a gaping pig, why he a harmless necessary cat, why he a woolen bagpipe, so can I give no reason, nor I will not, more than a lodged hate and certain loathing I bear Antonio, that I follow thus a losing suit against him. Are you answered?
I pray you, think you question with the Jew? You may as well go stand upon the beach and bid the main flood bait its usual height. You may as well use question with the wolf, why he hath made the ewe bleat for the lamb. You may as well forbid the mountain pines to wag their high tops and to make no noise when they are fretting with the gusts of heaven. You may as well do anything most hard as seek to soften that than which, what's harder? His Jewish heart. Therefore, I beseech you, make no more offers, use no farther means, but let me have justice, and the Jew his will.
How shalt thou hope for mercy, rendering none?
What judgment shall I dread, doing no wrong? You have among you many a purchased slave, which, like your asses and dogs and mules, you use in abject and slavish parts, because you bought them. Shall I say to you, let them be free? Marry them to your heirs. Why sweat they under burdens? Let their beds be made as soft as yours, and let their palates be seasoned with such viands. You will answer, the slaves are ours. So do I answer you. The pound of flesh which I demand of him is dearly bought. 'Tis mine, and I will have it. If you deny me, fie upon your law. There is no force in the decrees of Venice. I stand for judgment. Answer. Shall I have it?
The esteemed Bellario doth commend a young and learned doctor to our court. And here I take it as the doctor come, Come you from old Bellario?
I did, my lord.
You are welcome. Take your place. Are you acquainted with the difference that holds this present question in the court?
I'm informed thoroughly of the cause. Which is the merchant here and which the Jew?
Antonio and old Shylock both stand forth.
Is your name Shylock?
Shylock is my name.
Of a strange nature is the suit you follow. Yet in such a rule that the Venetian law cannot impugn you as you do proceed. You stand within his danger, do you not?
Aye. So he says.
Do you confess the bond?
I do.
Then must the Jew be merciful?
My deeds upon my head, I crave the law, the penalty and forfeit of my bond.
Is he not able to discharge the money?
Yes. Here, I tender it for him in the court, yea, twice the sum. If that will not suffice, it must appear that malice bears down truth. Then I beseech you, rest once the law to your authority. To do a great right, do a little wrong, and curb this cruel devil of his will.
It must not be. There is no power in Venice can alter decree established. It will be recorded for a precedent. And many an error by the same example will rush into the state. It cannot be.
Daniel come to judgment, yea, a Daniel, a wise young judge, how I do honor thee.
I pray you let me look upon the bond.
Here it is, most reverend doctor, here it is.
Shylock, there's thrice thy money offered thee.
An oath. An oath. I have an oath in heaven. Shall I lay perjury upon my soul? No, not for Venice.
Why, this bond is forfeit. And lawfully by this, the Jew may claim a pound of flesh to be by him cut off nearest to the merchant's heart. Be merciful. Take thrice thy money, bid me tear the bond.
When it is paid according to the tenor. It doth appear you are a worthy judge. You know the law. Your exposition hath been most sound. I charge you by the law, whereof you are a well-deserving pillar, proceed to judgment. By my soul, I swear, there is no power in the tongue of man to alter me. I stay here on my bond.
Most heartily I do beseech the courts to give the judgment.
Why, then thus it is. You must prepare your bosom for his knife.
O noble judge, O excellent young man.
For the intent and purpose of the law hath full relation, which here appeareth due upon the bond.
'Tis right, O wise and upright judge, how much more elder art thou than thy looks.
Therefore lay bare your bosom.
Aye, his breast. So says the bond, doth it not, noble judge? Nearest his heart, those are the very words.
It is so. Are there balance here to weigh the flesh?
I have them ready.
Have by some surgeon, Shylock, on your charge, to stop his wounds, lest he do bleed to death.
Is it nominated in the bond?
It is not so. But what of it? 'Twere good you do so much for charity.
I cannot find it. 'Tis not in the bond.
You, merchant, have you anything to say?
But little. I am armed and well prepared.
We tarry. I pray you, pursue sentence.
A pound of that same merchant's flesh is thine. The court awards it, and the law doth give it.
Most learned judge.
You must cut this flesh from off his breast. The court awards it, and the law allows it.
Most rightful judge. A sentence. Come. Prepare.
Tarry a little, there is something else. This bond doth give thee here no jot of blood. The words expressly are a pound of flesh. Take then thy bond, take thou thy pound of flesh, but in the cutting it, if thou dost shed one drop of Christian blood, all thy lands and goods are by the law of Venice confiscated unto the state of Venice.
Is that the law?
Thyself shalt see the act, for as thou urgest justice, be assured, thou shalt have justice more than thou desirest.
I take this offer then, pay the bond thrice, and let the Christian go.
Here is the money.
Soft, he shall have nothing but the penalty. Soft, no haste. He shall have nothing but the forfeiture. Therefore prepare thee to cut off the flesh. Shed thou no blood, nor take thou less nor more than just a pound of flesh. If thou takest more or less than a just pound, be it but so much as makes light or heavy in the substance or the division of the 20th part of one poor scruple, nay, if the scale do turn, but in the estimation of a hair, thou diest, and thy lands confiscate. Why doth the Jew pause? Take thy forfeiture.
Give me my principal and let me go.
I have it for thee. There it is.
He hath refused it. In the open court he shall have merely justice and his bond.
Shall I not have barely my principal?
Thou shalt have nothing but the forfeiture to be taken at thy own peril, Jew.
Nay then, the devil give him good of it. I'll stay no longer question.
Tarry, Jew. The law hath yet another hold on you. It is enacted in the law of Venice, if it be proved against an alien, that by direct or indirect attempts he seek the life of any citizen, the part against which he doth contrive shall seize one half his goods. The other half comes to the privy coffer of the state, and the offender's life lies in the mercy of the Duchess only, against all other voice. In which predicament I say thou standest. For as it appears by manifest proceeding, that indirectly and directly too thou hast contrived against the very life of the defendant, and thou hast incurred the danger formerly by me rehearsed down. Therefore, and beg mercy of the Duchess.
That thou shalt see the difference of our spirits, I pardon thee thy life before thou ask it. For half thy wealth, it is Antonio's. The other half comes to the general state, which humbleness may drive unto a fine.
Aye, for the state, not for Antonio.
Nay, take my life. Pardon not that. You take my house when you do take the prop that does sustain my house. You take my life when you do take the means whereby I live.
What mercy can you render him, Antonio?
So please, my lady the Duchess and all the court, to quit the fine for one half of his goods. I am content. So he will let me have the other half in use to render it upon his death unto the gentleman that lately stole his daughter. 2 things provided more. That for this favor he presently become a Christian. The other, that he do record a gift here in the court of all he dies possessed unto his son, Lorenzo, and his daughter.
He shall do this, or else I do recant the pardon that I late pronounced here.
Art thou contented, Jew? Dost thou say?
I am. Content.
Clerk, draw a deed of gift.
I pray you, give me leave to go from hence. I am not well. Send the deed after me, and I will sign it.
Get thee gone, but do it. Antonio, gratify this gentleman. For in my mind, you are much bound to him.
And now, please allow me to introduce the esteemed lawyers for the mock trial of Shylock. Song Richardson is Dean of Law at UC Irvine. Her research uses psychology to study criminal procedure, law, and policing. She has received many awards for her scholarship and teaching. Her scholarship has been published by law journals at Yale, Cornell, Northwestern, USC, and the University of Minnesota, among others. And she was recently nominated for OC Business Journal's Woman of the Year, Song Richardson. Erwin Chemerinsky was the founding dean of UC Irvine's law school. So you see we have a grudge match here. And is now Dean and Jesse H. Choper, Distinguished Professor of Law at Berkeley Law. He has written 11 books, including Free Speech on Campus with UCI Chancellor Howard Gilman. He frequently argues cases in the United States Supreme Court, and he was named a Fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and often appears arguing cases in the US Supreme Court. So, here we are, Erwin Chemerinsky. And the Honorable Andy Guilford is a judge at the United States District Court. He has received many awards and recognitions and is a frequent contributor to the programs of law at UCI and Berkeley. He will be presiding over today's trial. Andy Guilford. So just very quickly, we're going to have this mock trial, and in your program, you will find 2 cards. I'd like to turn the trial now over to Judge Guilford, who will give you more specific instructions.
This Court of Venice is now in session in the case of People versus Shylock. I shall read to you instructions. The judgment of 1598 was as follows. The court ruled that Shylock's contract was invalid. As a consequence, he not only owed no additional payment from Antonio, or even the return of his principal, but he would also lose control of his remaining assets, which would go to his daughter and son-in-law at his death. Now, if you wish to reverse that judgment against Shylock, turn in the Shylock card. If you wish to affirm the judgment against Shylock, turn in the Portia card. I will repeat these instructions at the end of the hearing here today. We will begin with the attorney for Shylock, Dean Chemerinsky. Please begin.
No, Song goes first.
Please begin, Song.
It's okay, though.
No.
If the
You're the
state would
appellant.
like to... No, I'm saying if you would like to ask for the reversal of the judgment against Shylock.
I think not, opposing counsel.
Please let me know if you can't hear me in the back, if you raise your hands. You ruthless enemy. You disgusting dog. You inhuman wretch.
These were the words that were uttered about Shylock and to Shylock in a court. This is the type of treatment that Shylock was subjected to his entire life. But it is not only that occurred in that courtroom that day, but that learned jurist was a cunning, conniving con artist who walked into that courtroom disguising herself as a man, pretending to be impartial. Why? So that she could help her husband's best friend and orchestrate Shylock's destruction. Ladies and gentlemen, that entire hearing that you just saw was completely illegitimate. It was a total fraud. Not only because it was infected by virulent anti-Semitism, but also because the learned jurist, that cunning, conniving con artist, committed a crime by practicing law without a license. But it went further than that. She also committed a fraud on the court. And for those reasons alone, although there are many more, you should reverse the judgment against Shylock. You cutthroat, dirty dog. This is how Shylock was treated each and every day by the Christians of Venice. Each time he wanted to leave the sanctuary of his own home, whether to worship at the synagogue, to take a walk, to conduct business, anytime he left his home, he had to mentally and physically prepare himself to be spit on, kicked, insulted, humiliated, degraded by Christians like Antonio, who hated him simply because he was Jewish. What Shylock didn't know, what he didn't understand, is that this anti-Semitism would follow him into a court. So let me tell you a little bit about Antonio. Christians love Antonio because with them, he's kind, he's generous. Antonio, in a word, is a gentleman. But Antonio has two faces. The one he shows to his fellow Christians, and then the one he shows to the Jewish people that he despises. Because isn't that how anti-Semitism works? And with the Jewish people, he is callous and cruel. He never, ever showed them or Shylock any mercy or any grace. And that's why Antonio had a problem. Because Antonio's best friend, the man who would ultimately marry this cunning, conniving con artist, his best friend wanted to borrow money in order to woo Portia. And Antonio is the merchant of Venice. He is extremely wealthy. The problem, though, is that all of his wealth was temporarily tied up elsewhere. So he had a problem. He needed to borrow money from Shylock. So you might think then that for once in his life, Antonio would show some mercy and some grace to Shylock. But his hatred of the Jewish people ran too deep, and he simply couldn't do it. What Antonio should have done is said to Shylock, "I am so sorry, Shylock, for spitting on you, for kicking you, for laughing at your losses, for calling you a heathen, for calling you a dog. I was wrong. I will never do that again." But he couldn't bring himself to do it. Instead, what he said to Shylock is, "I've done all these things to you in the past, and I will do them to you again in the future. But will you loan me some money?" What would you have done? Would you have loaned this anti-Semite money? Shylock did. And not only did he allow Antonio to borrow money from him, but he took it one step further and he did not charge any interest. And that's important because the only way that Shylock could make a living was to charge interest on the loans he made. That's how he could support his family. But he said to Antonio, I won't charge you any interest, Antonio. And then they both agreed that if Antonio could not pay that loan back in 3 months, Antonio would owe Shylock a pound of his flesh. Now, some of you may find that shocking. Is it any more shocking than the pound of flesh that the Christian vultures of Venice took from Shylock every single day of his life? Remember that the Christians of Venice, every single day, conspired to impose injustice on Shylock. And with every spit, with every drop of spittle, with every assault, with every name, it chipped away at Shylock's dignity and his self-esteem. So putting that provision in the contract was the only safe way that Shylock could register his hurt, his anger, his humiliation for the things that Christians like Antonio had done to him his entire life. The only safe way. Because if Shylock had done it any other way, he wouldn't be sitting here today. So remember that when you think about the terms of the contract, and let's never question the fairness of that bargain. Let's never question it because Antonio, he is the merchant of Venice. He is the more privileged and powerful person in this relationship. He didn't have to sign that contract, but he chose to because he thought it was fair. And after signing it, he told Shylock, and then he told a friend of his later, how kind Shylock had been for letting him borrow money without interest. Let's not question the fairness of this bargain. Antonio, this was not some nefarious plan. Antonio wasn't under duress. He didn't sign this contract not knowing what he was signing. He fully knew what he was signing. Let's not question the fairness of this bargain. And finally, no one thought, not Antonio, not Shylock, no one thought that Antonio would not be able to pay the loan back. Remember, Antonio is the merchant of Venice. He is very wealthy. His wealth was only temporarily tied up elsewhere. So let's not question the fairness of this bargain. So what happened then when the loan was due? Remarkably, Antonio couldn't pay it back, and Shylock, he was a broken man. If mercy is the strongest in the strongest people, Shylock had no strength left. His family is what gave him strength, and his beloved wife had passed away. The only family Shylock had left was his daughter, and he loved her. He trusted her. He cherished her. She was his heart. She gave him strength, and now she was gone. She had run away with a Christian, a friend of Antonio's no less, and she was planning to convert. Shylock was heartbroken. Her betrayal was unexpected and devastating. He was a broken man. He had no strength left. And then he learned one final thing, which is that his daughter had taken the one memento, the ring, the one memento of his wife that she had left him right before her death. His daughter had stolen that ring and then sold it for money. Shylock was a broken man. So what happened then at this hearing that you saw a part of. It started out with them calling Shylock in open court a dog. They said to him in open court that it would be justice to kill him. They said to him that his mother's womb was unholy because it gave birth to him. Did you hear anyone in that courtroom say that is inappropriate to say in life, especially in a courtroom, especially when we have a case about the contract between Shylock and Antonio? No one said a word about those things being inappropriate. But this was Shylock's life. He was accustomed to it. All he wanted to do was to rely on the law in this courtroom. He thought he could rely on the law. So he ignored on all of that and put his faith in the law. What he didn't realize is that this virulent anti-Semitism from society would follow him into this court. He didn't know he should have had his guard up the way he always did, and he certainly didn't know that he couldn't trust a learned jurist who came into that courtroom. You already know what I'm going to call that learned jurist. So let's think about her for a moment. Why did she do this? Why did this cunning, conniving con artist dress up as a man? She, of course, wanted to help her husband's best friend, Antonio. That's one reason. But she's anti-Semitic too, and she wanted to destroy Shylock. How do you know that? If all she wanted to do was walk into that courtroom and help her husband's best friend by pretending to be impartial, she could have walked into that courtroom, turned to Shylock, and she could have said, Shylock, don't seek to enforce that contract, because if you do, if you spill even one drop of a Christian's blood, because this was an anti-Semitic law, we will execute you. Shylock, don't enforce this contract, because if you cut off 1 pound more or less than 1 pound of flesh, we will execute you.
2 minutes, counsel.
And she would have said to him, under the anti-Semitic laws that existed, if you directly or indirectly threaten the life of a Christian, we will execute you. That's what she could have said. And what would Shylock have done? He would have said, okay, just give me the money I'm owed, Antonio, and we wouldn't be here today, because this case is not about mercy. So instead, she walks into that courtroom, and what does she do? She baits Shylock into believing that the law is on his side. She tells him not once, not twice, not 3 times, but 4, that the law allows him to enforce the contract. And once he takes her bait because he still believes in the power of the law, that's when she says, oh, by the way, and then she tells him everything else I just told you. She could have told him that at the beginning. We would not be here today. But once she asks him to show mercy, and then when Shylock says, never mind, just give me the money I'm owed, she tells him it's too late. She speaks eloquently about mercy, but then renders Shylock none. And then the remainder of the Christians in that courtroom, they took their pound of flesh too. They said they took the last thing that he had, which was his faith. Telling him, we will spare your life, Shylock, as long as you convert to Christianity, and Antonio, the merchant of Venice, gets to walk away scot-free. That's what Christian justice is like in Venice.
Time will now come from Rebuttal.
I walked in here this morning and saw this amazing fruit salad. And I love fruit salad, right? It smells good, the yogurt's really creamy, the fruit is really crunchy, and so I started to eat it, and then I saw something nasty, dirty, disgusting. So I called the waiter over, and the waiter came over and pulled out this cockroach and said, "It's fine, miss. Now you can eat the salad." But of course I couldn't eat the salad because that disgusting cockroach infected the entire thing in the same way that this cunning, conniving con artist infected that entire hearing. Do not let the state convince you that you can just remove the crime she committed, the fraud on the court that she committed, and give any legitimacy to that judgment against Shylock. Ladies and gentlemen, reverse that judgment and give Shylock his life back. Thank you.
I don't usually allow applaud in my forum, except in exceptional cases. That was an exceptional case. And Dean Chemerinsky, 15 minutes on behalf of the City of Venice.
I want to thank those from Berkeley Law, from our Communications Events Department who put this on. I particularly want to thank those who made the trip to Berkeley for this, the terrific actors, our esteemed judge, and of course, my dear friend and opposing counsel, Song Richardson. As you heard, Song is eloquent and passionate, but in the words of Shakespeare, from nothing less than the Merchant of Venice, all that glitters is not gold. As defense counsels often do when they have a guilty client, what Dean Richardson wants to do is distract your attention from the facts, the law, and the issues before you. I think it's important that I begin by pointing your attention to the specific issues that you as a jury must decide. So I ask you to look at your program, and on the back it tells you the issues. Judge Guilford has already read them to you. Judgment, 1598. The court ruled that Shylock's contract was invalid. As a consequence, he was not only owed no additional payment from Antonio, even the return of his principal, but also lose control of his remaining assets, which go to his daughter and son-in-law at his death. So, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, there are two questions that you must answer today. First, is Shylock's contract with Antonio enforceable? And second, did Shylock commit a crime for which he should be punished? Dean Richardson wants to talk in great detail about the anti-Semitism that existed in Venice. If the question before you was, did anti-Semitism exist in Venice? You should resoundingly say yes. Jews were confined to a ghetto there. They had to wear a red beret when they left the ghetto. But that's not the question you're asked today. Dean Richardson wants to tell you that Shylock was subjected to terrible treatment and discrimination because he was Jewish. And unquestionably, that's true. But that's not the question before you either. There are two issues and just two issues. Is the contract with Antonio enforceable? And did Shylock commit a crime for which he punished? Like defense lawyers all over the country and maybe all over the world, Dean Richardson wants to make her client Shylock seem the victim, not the villain. But that just can't be justified based on the record that you have, the play of The Merchant of Venice. First read The Merchant of Venice when I was in high school. I'm Jewish, and I was deeply disturbed by the portrayal of Shylock. Shakespeare uses the worst stereotypes and characters of Jews in drawing this character. He portrays Shylock as an unscrupulous moneylender. Shylock enters into a contract with Antonio and charges no interest because instead he wants to have Antonio maimed, murdered. Shylock is offered a deal 10 times the amount of money, but refuses the deal because he wants to have Antonio maimed and murdered. If in the end you have to decide, is Shylock the victim or Shylock the villain, ask yourself this. If a lawyer today is called a Shylock, should that lawyer feel complimented or insulted? If you have to ask the question, was Shylock the victim or the villain, ask yourself, why between 1933 and 1939 did Nazi Germany put on 50 different productions of the play The Merchant of Venice? When the book first came out, it was called The Jew of Venice. If you look at some of the first printed editions, it had on the cover a caricature of a Jew with a beak nose, playing on, again, the worst stereotypes, the worst images of Jews. But your task, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, today is not to judge Shakespeare and why he drew the Shylock character this way. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, it's not to assess whether there's anti-Semitism in Venice. It's not to assess whether Jews there were persecuted. As I said to you, if you focus on the questions presented, there are two issues you must address. The first is Shylock's contract with Antonio enforceable? In no country, no court in this country, and I hope no country in the world, would a contract that called for the maiming and likely murder of a person be enforceable? I can ask you, is there a single person in this theater who would believe that a contract that calls for a cutting of a pound of flesh from a person should be carried out? There's no doubt in the play why Shylock wanted this contract. He was burning with hatred, and hatred for Antonio. I can quote you the language from The Merchant of Venice. From Act 1, Shylock says, quote, I hate him for he is a Christian, but more for that in low simplicity. He lends out money gratis and brings down the rate of interest here in Venice. In Act 4, Shylock says as to why he will not accept a compromise, why he would not take a settlement, that he has a lodged hate and a certain loathing. What you're asked to do today, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, is take the law of California as it exists in 2020 and apply it to the facts of The Merchant of Venice. Now, this may seem artificial, but of course, from that perspective, the time period for this appeal has long since expired. But focus on California law as you must. The California Civil Code, section 1668, speaks to exactly the issue that you must resolve as jurors. It says, all contracts which have for their object, directly or indirectly, the willful injury to the person or property of another, whether willful or negligent, are against the policy of law and thus unenforceable. That is exactly what this contract calls for. Now, Dean Richardson wants to say Antonio voluntarily entered into the contract. But that does not make a contract that's against public policy enforceable. Even if people voluntarily knowingly enter a contract that calls for the maiming and death of another, that contract is still against public policy and not enforceable. So that then brings me to the second issue that's before you. Did Shylock commit a crime? In the law of California and the law of the United States, make it a crime to threaten another person. If a person through words causes another individual to reasonably fear for his or her safety, that is an offense punishable by law. And once more, it is important to begin by looking at California law in this regard. Here, California Penal Code, section 422A, prohibits making a threat against another. And you should focus on the elements of this crime, because each and every one is met here. In order to violate this law, it's necessary to willfully threaten to kill or cause great bodily harm to another. The threat must be communicated verbally, in writing, or via an electronic device. It must be intended that the statement be taken as a threat. It must be the threat was immediate, clear, and specific, and that the person had reasonable fear for his or her safety. Each and every one of those requirements is met. And in fact, the federal law, 18 United States Code, Section 875, likewise makes it a crime. So focus on what occurred in this play. Focus on the words of Shylock. Shylock says, quote, revenge. Why revenge? The villain you teach me I will execute. It shall go hard, but I will better the execution. Shylock says, in words that are truly incriminating, the pound of flesh which I demand of him is dearly bought. 'Tis mine and I will have it. There is the scene where Shylock is seen sharpening his knife on the bottom of his shoe. Bassanio says, why dost thou whet thy knife so earnestly? Shylock says, to cut the forfeiture from that bankrupt here. When Shylock stands before Portia the judge, Shylock demands the judgment, and the judgment he wants is the pound of flesh to be cut. Shylock says, most learned judge, a sentence, come prepared. And at this point, he holds the knife to the holds a knife to the throat of Antonio. That is a threat. That violates the law. So if you focus on the two issues that are before you, the answers to each are clear. What Song wants to talk about in great detail is the prejudice that occurred in Venice and the prejudice that she believes occurred in this trial. Why might that be relevant here? Well, I can think of three possibilities. One is she's trying to tell you, excuse what Shylock did because Shylock was subject to anti-Semitism and to persecution. But that's not right. Even those who are subjected to racism, sexism, homophobia, anti-Semitism are still responsible for their actions. And that's all we're saying here, is that Shylock is responsible for his. Second, she might be saying to you, Shylock didn't get a fair trial because of the anti-Semitism. But that misses the point today. Today, you are the jurors. Today, it is for you to take the law of California and apply it to the facts of the Merchant of Venice. And I think when you do that, it's clear that Shylock must be held responsible. Now, there's a third thing she might be saying, and that's that the punishment imposed on Shylock was excessive. Well, here again, look at California law. For the California statute I mentioned, the punishment is up to a year in prison and a $5,000 fine. For the federal law that prohibits making a threat, it's up to 5 years in prison. Shylock was not sentenced to imprisonment. No monetary fine was imposed against him, and if it was less than $5,000. And if you focus on it, Shylock didn't lose the assets. They were simply to go to his daughter and to his son-in-law. Now, Dean Richardson wants to make it seem that this punishment was so extreme that it shows Portia's bias against him. Portia saved Shylock's life. Because had Shylock taken the pound of flesh, as even Dean Richardson admits, the punishment for Shylock would have been death. So by doing this, Portia did not impose an excessive penalty, but saved Shylock's life. Now, Dean Richardson wants to talk about how, in the end, Shylock was ordered to convert to Christianity. And it's not part of the trial today in terms of assessing, we're not discussing whether that was an appropriate punishment. It clearly wasn't. To me, it further reflects the anti-Semitism of the Merchant of Venice. Because at the time the Merchant of Venice was written, it was thought that only Christians could go to heaven. And by Shakespeare requiring the conversion of Shylock, it was saving Shylock's soul.
2 minutes, counsel.
In the end, you are jurors, and you're responsible for taking the law and applying it to the record, the facts that are before you. When you do that, I think the conclusions are clear. The contract with Antonio is unenforceable. Shylock did commit a crime for which he was punished, and here the punishment fit the crime. Thank you.
Richardson, you have 3 minutes and 45 seconds.
I'll speak very quickly. So I find it interesting how the state goes back and forth from talking about the history of the Merchant of Venice and Shakespeare and what might have gone on at that time to draw attention away from the case itself, and then talks about the case itself. You can't have it both ways. Either we are in the trial of the Merchant of Venice, or we're going to step outside of it and talk about the history of the Merchant of Venice. But I think we are in the trial of the Merchant of Venice. So that is what I will focus on. And what I love about the argument that the contract was void from the beginning is that we shouldn't even be here today then. If that contract was void at the moment it was made, then we don't get to where we are today. That is just totally unenforceable, and we are done. We didn't have to have this hearing. There was nothing to talk about. But let me ask all of you to think about whether or not a crime was committed. Because the state talks about the word willful. Was this willful? Was there for the law students here, a specific intent to kill? And my and your thought is, we actually don't know. This is not a trial on a crime. What crime? That's the first question I have. What crime will we charge Shylock with? And then secondly, when we live in a society where we make accusations and a defendant is innocent until proven guilty, we have the statute, I know what the crime's about, and then we can come back to court and have a trial on whether or not Shylock is guilty of a crime. And then we can also come back to court and figure out if Portia is guilty of a crime. And we can come back and talk about all the other people who have hit, spit, kicked Shylock his entire life and see if they're all guilty of crimes, because where is the state when all of that happened? Why is the state sitting next to the person who committed 2 crimes? But I'll just focus on one, right? The crime of practicing law without a license. So let's do that. But where I do want to leave you all is with this. In California, 1 minute? Okay, perfect. In California, there is something called fraud on the court. Moore versus California, case number CV 13-02422 DDP, cited in Dixon versus CIR, Alexander versus Robertson, McKeever versus Superior Court, McGinnis versus Superior Court. Fraud on the court. Fraud on the court occurs when the judicial machinery itself has been tainted by an attorney or an officer of the court. And it occurs when someone, like a learned jurist, makes misrepresentations to the court. Fraud on the court makes void everything that happened within it. You experienced fraud on the court by this learned jurist who lied to everyone, and she was so conniving, her own husband didn't recognize her. She learned all the laws so she could use them against Shylock. So yes, let's void the contract from the very beginning. Then we don't need to be here. If there is going to be a criminal case, let's do it the right way. Let's bring in indictment so that we know what the charges are, so that we can defend Shylock. And finally, let's bring a case against a criminal who's sitting at counsel table for the state. So we ask you to void that judgment against Shylock because of the fraud in the court that took place. Thank you very much.
Dean Chemerinsky.
Song does not deny that there are 2 questions before you. And only 2 questions. First, is the contract between Shylock and Antonio enforceable? And I tell you that it's unenforceable. Under California law, a contract that would call for the maiming, injury of another person is is against public policy. And so Song says to you, well, then we would have nothing to discuss. And of course, she's right. Often people go to court to enforce contracts that are enforceable. And in this instance, Shylock went to court to enforce a contract that was unenforceable. Notice, go back to the judgment, it's being appealed to you. It says, the court ruled that Shylock's contract was invalid. I think everything that Song said would agree that this contract was invalid, and therefore you cannot vote for Shylock on that issue. Like any other litigant who goes to court to enforce an unenforceable contract, Shylock has to lose. The second issue is, did Shylock commit a crime? And I told you the crime that he committed was to make a threat against Antonio. Now, what Song says here is that Shylock didn't have the intent to kill. But that's not the crime he's charged with. Nowhere did I say he should be charged with attempted murder. I think the text before you would justify that. But I said the crime was making a threat against another. And I quoted you from the California Penal Code. I cited you to federal law that says that if a person uses words that cause another to reasonably fear for his or her physical safety, that is sufficient. And of course, in addition to quoting you the words of Shylock, I pointed out that Shylock was sharpening his knife. Shylock took the knife and put it to Antonio's throat. That is enough for a threat. That is enough for a crime. So if you focus on the two issues before you, you must vote for the state and against Shylock. Well, what Song does, as defense lawyers often do, is try to divert the attention to someone else. She says that Portia was practicing law without a license. Actually, Portia was serving as a judge, and there is no law in California or anywhere else that requires that the judge actually be a lawyer. There are many judges in the United States who are not lawyers. And what Song doesn't answer, which I think is so important, is that Portia actually saved Shylock's life. Had she carried out the judgment, enforced the contract, taken the pound of flesh, Shylock then would have subjected to the death penalty under Venetian law at the time. So what Portia did, and as often is regarded as a brilliant compromise, said that Shylock could have his pound of flesh, but only if he could take it without a drop of blood being lost. And in this way, Shylock's life was spared. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Dean Richardson is right. We shouldn't be focusing on the anti-Semitism of Venice at the time. We shouldn't be focusing on the way that Shylock was treated generally. What you need to focus on is the specific issues before you. Is a contract that calls for the maiming of another person enforceable? Of course not. Did Shylock threaten Antonio with his words and his acts? Absolutely. And thus, there is only one possible verdict. A verdict for Venice. Turn in the card for Portia.
Thank you, counsel. That really was exceptional. And ladies and gentlemen, you just heard from the two deans of two of the greatest public law schools in the country. So. It's been a pleasure for me, and the rule of law is in good hands. Now, in this case, the ultimate decision rests with you. You have these ballots. Let me start with the ballot for Shylock. By the way, that is his daughter there behind him. So, if you are for Dean Richardson and Shylock, use this ballot. And if you are for the people, the city of Venice, use this ballot. Now, we have just seen much ado about something. This has been a tale told by geniuses, full of sound and fury, signifying what you are about to tell us through your ballots. And I'm going again read the jury instructions as you fill them out. The result will then be handed up to me and I will announce it. All right, the judgment of 1598, you may talk over me as you discuss it amongst yourselves. The judgment of 1598, the court ruled that Shylock's contract was invalid. As a consequence, he was not only owed no additional payment from Antonio or even the return of his principal, but he would also lose control of his remaining assets, which would go to his daughter and son-in-law at death. If you want to reverse the judgment against Shylock, turn in the Shylock card. If you want to affirm the judgment against Shylock, turn in the Portia card. We'll have results in just a moment.
While we're counting ballots, we are going to present to you 3 short scenes from The Merchant of Venice featuring our actors, just for a little entertainment value. And we do have to count them up and get an accurate count. We know who the clear favorite is here. And so the first scene is from Act 1, Scene 3, and it features Shylock and Antonio, Greg Unger as Shylock, and Sean Spann as Antonio. We just selected some scenes that we thought would bring you some of the best lines in the play. So this is the first scene. It takes place right in the streets of Venice.
Shylock, although I neither lend nor borrow by taking nor by giving of excess, yet to supply the ripe wants of my friend, I'll break a custom. Are you yet possessed how much we would?
Aye, 3,000 ducats.
And for 3 months?
I had forgot, 3 months. You told me so. Well then, to your bond, let me see. But soft, when Jacob grazed his uncle Laban's sheep, this Jacob from our holy Abram.
And what of him? Did he take interest?
No, not take interest. Not as you would say, directly interest. Mark you what Jacob did.
Mark you this. The devil can cite scripture for his purpose. An evil soul producing holy witness is like a villain with a smiling cheek. A goodly apple rotten at the heart. Oh, what a goodly outside falsehood hath.
3,000 ducats is a good round sum. 3 months from 12. Then let me see the rate.
Well, Shylock, shall we be beholding to you?
Signor Antonio, many a time and oft in the Rialto, you have rated me about my monies and my usances. Still have I borne it with a patient shrug, for sufferance is the badge of all our tribe. You call me misbeliever, cutthroat dog, and spit upon my Jewish gabardine, and offer use of that which is mine own. Well, it now appears you need my help. Go to then, you come to me, and you say, Shylock, we would have monies. You say so, you that did void your room upon my beard, and foot me as you spurn a stranger cur over your threshold. Monies is your suit. What should I say to you? Should I not say, hath a dog money? Is it possible a cur can lend 3,000 ducats? Or shall I bend low and in a bondman's key with bated breath and whispering humbleness say this, fair sir, you spit on me Wednesday last, you spurned me such a day, another day you called me dog, and for these courtesies I'll lend you thus much money?
I am as like to call thee so again, to spit on thee again, to spurn thee, to... If thou wilt lend this money, lend it not as to thy friend, for when did friendship take a breed for barren metal of his friend? But lend it, rather, to thine enemy, who if he breaks, thou mayst with better face exact the penalty.
Why, look you how you storm. I would be friends with you and have your love, Forget the shames you have stained me with. Supply your present wants and take no doit of usance for my monies, and you'll not hear me. This is kind I offer.
Next, we have Portia's famous speech from the trial scene with Hope Andrew-Jack.
The quality of mercy is not strained. It droppeth as the gentle rain from heaven upon the place beneath. It is twice blessed. It blesseth him that gives and him that takes. 'Tis mightiest in the mightiest. It becomes a throned monarch better than his crown. His scepter shows the force of temporal power, wherein doth sit the dread and fear of kings. But mercy is above this sceptred sway. It is enthroned in the hearts of kings. It is an attribute to God himself. And earthly power doth then show likest gods when mercy seasons justice. Therefore, Jew, though justice be thy plea, consider this, that in the course of justice, none of us should see salvation. We do pray for mercy. And that same prayer doth teach us all to render the deeds of mercy. I have spoken thus much to mitigate the justice of thy plea, which if thou follow, this strict court of Venice must needs give sentence against the merchant there. Why, I am sure if thou forfeit, thou wilt not take his flesh. What's that good for?
To bait fish withal. If it will feed nothing else, it will feed my revenge. He hath disgraced me and hindered me 500,000, laughed at my losses, mocked at my gains, scorned my nation, thwarted my bargains, cooled my friends, heated mine enemies. And what's his reason? I am a Jew. Hath not a Jew eyes? Hath not a Jew hands, organs, dimensions, senses, affections, passions? Fed with the same food, hurt by the same weapons, subject to the same diseases, healed by the same means, warmed and cooled by the same winter and summer as a Christian is. If you prick us, do we not bleed? If you tickle us, do we not laugh? If you poison us, do we not die? And if you wrong us, shall we not revenge? If we are like you in the rest, we will resemble you in that. If a Jew wrong a Christian, what is his humility? Revenge. If a Christian wrong a Jew, what should his sufferance be? By Christian example, why? Revenge. The villainy you teach, I will execute, and it shall go hard, but I will better the instruction.
The defendant will rise, please. The vote to affirm the judgment and keep Shylock in jail is 120. The vote to reverse the judgment and release Shylock is 242. Mr. Shylock, you are a free man, and the court is now adjourned.